I just want to spend a few minutes and provide an update on activities at Nebraska Public Power District that you might be interested in since we last talked on this stage about a year ago. And I'm going to start with the board last December passed our strategic directive that sets our goal for decarbonization for the district. And that strategic directive was set to be at carbon neutral by 2050, while ensuring that we maintain affordability and reliability for our customers. So we went through a process last fall that was the culmination of 2 years of work with our board and customers and consultants on what approach we should take. And I'm very pleased with the outcome. I think the fact that our board really emphasized in the wording the importance of affordability and reliability as we make this transition over time was good for us and our customers, and it sets a good path for us as we move forward. Which gets me to the next big thing we're working on, and that is that path forward. We're in the middle of doing our integrated resource plan right now. We started that process earlier this year with the goal of having the plan finished and published and approved through our board next September. So we're a little bit behind our peers here that we'll be talking shortly. Both LES and OPPD, their cycle is a little bit ahead of ours, but we are heavily engaged in the middle of that. We've gone through some assumptions discussion with our customers, and we're doing the analytics right now. And as we get through the end of the year and into spring, you'll start to see more public outreach as we share the preliminary results and start discussing with our customers and the public what those results mean and how they help chart that path forward. The goal of the IRP, again, is to not specify exactly what the next resources might be, but to lay out a path that, given our understanding of what the future will likely to be, as the best path forward. So there'll likely be things and signposts and stuff that allow us to change and adapt. And it's something that we, like our peers, go through every 5 years to update and look at. Additionally, we've been very engaged in fulfilling the outcomes of a couple of bills that were passed by the legislature last session. And one had to do with creating a working group to put together an application and compete for some of the funds that came out of the IIJA that had to do with hydrogen hub funding nationally. So us, NPPD, along with the Farm Bureau, Union Pacific, Warner Trucking, Monolith, and Tallgrass Materials are part of a board, our governor-appointed board, that is working to put together an application. We call it the Mid-Continent Clean Hydrogen Hub is the name of this particular application, to respond and compete for that, to hopefully create and get federal funding to develop and implement a clean energy hydrogen hub here in the state. And I know that Monolith was a speaker at the event, and they gave an update on a lot of the work that they're doing there as well. Another bill that was passed last year by the legislature was to commit up to $1 million of funding to do preliminary siting studies for advanced nuclear, small modular nuclear reactors. And so we've recently applied for that. The way the legislation was written, it's to be applied to an operator of a nuclear power plant in Nebraska. We happen to be the only one right now, but we still have to go through an application process. So we're in the middle of that process right now, and we'll be using those funds, again, working across the state and looking at potential locations to do some preliminary siting work for where it might make sense to develop nuclear in the future as another clean energy resource. We're doing a lot in the demand response area, and I know that's been a topic of several discussions here today in terms of demand response and distributed energy resources and how to take advantage of those in the marketplace. We implemented a pilot with a large retail customer this year to actually use their load as a demand response resource in the wholesale power market we compete with, and it's been pretty successful so far. Our board will be considering a rate here in the next month. And if they approve that rate, that will create the rate framework so that we can apply that same type of process on a pilot basis with our wholesale customers, so our wholesale customers can do that with their retail customers. And this is all in preparation of what we see coming down the road in terms of the changing energy environment and more distributed resources and intermittent resources, and certainly the desire at the federal level to establish policy to allow for aggregation and competition in wholesale markets of those types of resources. And the current FERC order that's out there right now that describes how this will work is referred to as FERC Order 2222. And so if you haven't read up on it, you can go out there and read it and scratch your head like the rest of us are. But it's coming, and we want to be prepared for it because we see the opportunity to provide value to the customers we serve ultimately if we can manage that appropriately. We've done a lot in community solar. I want to mention, and I know he's in the back, Mayor Moaning from Norfolk. If you go to your little brochure here, you'll see that the Norfolk Community Solar Project is the largest project in the state, and we had the ribbon cutting earlier this year, and we're really excited about that partnership. We also recently did the celebration for Community Solar Project in York, 3.2 megawatts. And that continues to be something that our customers are very interested in, both at our wholesale customers and retail customers. If you look at the roughly 53 megawatts of solar in the state today, about 36.8 of those megawatts are through projects that either MPPD has done at retail or through our wholesale customers, and our retail division is responsible for 23 of those megawatts of solar development. So to say that we're interested and supportive of solar, I would say is an understatement, and that's something that we continue to work on to meet the needs and the desires of the communities we serve. We do a lot and are doing a lot around efficient electrification. A couple of things that I'd like to mention is we continue to be involved with electric vehicle programs. We've developed a retail rate that provides for off-peak power pricing in our retail communities for those that want to take advantage of that for electric vehicle charging. We're very engaged with our customers to develop fast charging, DC fast charging infrastructure across the state, working with the Nebraska Department of Transportation and National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And we're a member of the National Electric Highway Coalition, which is a coalition of utilities across the nation that have agreed to standards in terms of developing and ensuring that appropriate DC fast charging infrastructure happens in major transportation corridors. I would say that the IIJ that I mentioned and the IRA are huge opportunities for our industry. We're still trying to unpack and understand that, and I know that I think our peers probably have a similar view in terms of that, but when you think about the opportunities to work together to use these funds that are coming to help develop clean energy, to help incent the continued use of nuclear power as a clean energy resource, et cetera. It's a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to working on that with our customers. And I was told I had to mention this. So last but not least, our project. We've talked about that almost every year. The R project is still out there. We are in the process of working with the Fish and Wildlife Service to do the supplemental environmental impact statement that's required to address the issues that the District Court of Colorado identified as deficiencies in their permit. You should see in the next 2 to 4 weeks, if you watch the Federal Register, the official notification of intent come out, and that will start the clock to finish that process, and that's roughly a 2-year clock. Once we are through that process of checked the boxes, got the permit issued, again about 2 years from now, we'll be ready to start construction again. We have a lot of the materials purchased already, and so it's just staying focused and getting that done. And from a reliability standpoint for the grid here in Nebraska, it is as important as it ever has been. It's more important than it was 10 years ago because our load continues to grow. And it's also important to help ensure that we can continue to serve load and generation in the state well into the future.
Thanks, Steve. You know, I've been participating in this for a number of years, and now I have a question for John because it dawned on me I hadn't ever realized that this panel is the only one that has a prayer before it. John, that's a little suspicious, but then when Tom brought up the R line, it's all clear to me now. So, you know, last year at this time, I was reporting on the decarbonization goal that the LES board adopted in December of 2020. A common question, and that goal, just to refresh everybody here, if you don't know it, was in effect to be net zero carbon or CO2 production from our generation facilities by 2040. A common comment we got when we were talking about that in the public is, well, how are you going to do it? And the common response we had was, we don't know yet. So what I'd like to do today is tell you about our IRP, or Integrated Resource Plan process that Tom referenced, that was just completed, adopted by the board last week. And it's over a year-long process, and what I'm going to try to do is condense in 10 minutes and give you an overview of that, which is probably not reasonable because Scott Benson led that effort, and when he talks about it, it takes an hour. So this is going to be the real condensed version, but what you have the opportunity to do is go to the LES website. You can look at the entire report, which is 260 pages, about 160 of that's the report itself. You can contact Scott. You can look at the presentations because they were all recorded in there. So there's a lot of data out there that you can look at. But our goal always set, when the board adopted, they said basically we had to maintain our high reliability, it had to be fiscally responsible, it had to recognize changes in technology. Our existing contracts had to be sustainable from the perspective that we couldn't chase the goal and do things that might adversely impact the environment. And all of that was still recognizing that from the period 2010 to 2020, we in effect had actually reduced our CO2 emissions by 53%. So this is on top of that and how we're pursuing it. And to talk about the process, I'm just going to kind of run through the obvious things, and many of you understand the integrated resource planning process, and in effect what that means is we're balancing supply side resources with demand side, demand response, conservation, as Tom referenced. And that's kind of the process where you bring that all together to see how am I going to basically meet those future loads. So the first thing you have to do is come up with a load forecast, and that's part of the process. But in addition, what we did is we actually contracted with a couple different consultants. One of them was to look at our sustainable energy program, which is that program that basically incentivizes conservation and demand response, to make sure that we're tracking and trying to meet basically the best alternatives we had for that. In addition, we actually retained a consultant to do an effective load carrying capability analysis that is a part of the SPP process many of you are familiar with, which looks at what kind, in effect, when you're adding renewable resources, how much of those resources you can count toward your reserve requirement with SPP, which has been talked about, obviously, over this conference as well. And we did that because we wanted to try to figure out, as we keep adding solar and wind and batteries, how much do we get to credit that toward meeting that reserve margin in 2040? So those were the kind of the preparatory pieces. As a part of that ELCC process, it looked at a Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 for each of the resources, because the Tier 1 ends up having the highest capacity that you can get, and then Tier 2 and Tier 3 was less. Again, all that data is online. And after you do that, then you set out and say, okay, how are we going to evaluate the resources? So in our case, we basically look at EIA data to select the resources that are basically, in some cases, they aren't yet quite proven, but they are listed by EIA. We use EIA because it's standardized data for cost. And it looked at a full range of things that we're putting in to let the model evaluate. So that would range from, obviously, wind and solar, but it's also going to be nuclear, combined cycle, reciprocating engines. It's going to include combined cycle units. It actually looked at the sustainable energy program. We have all those things. We evaluate each one of those technologies basically over 100 different futures, if you will, ranging from a matrix that looks at in effect, from $0 to $90 of carbon per ton, and from $1 to $9 gas. So it looks at that, does a heat map on each of those resources, said over any of those futures, what's the likelihood that you're going to pick that as being effective? As you might guess, some things don't perform as well at high carbon prices and high gas prices, and so they all kind of have a different profile, but you use that to inform what does that resource plan look like when we put it forward. Now, also as a reminder, in our current portfolio, we have about 400 megawatts of coal. We have ownership position in a couple hundred megawatts in Laramie River Station in Wheatland, Wyoming. We have 100 megawatts of basic ownership position with Walter Scott, with Mid-American in Council Bluffs, and we have 100 megawatts of a life of plant contract with MPPD for Gerald Gentleman. So when we talk about reaching that 2040 goal, in effect, we have to look at the basically retiring those particular resources as we go forward. So when we were running the base case, the question is, how do you treat that? And how we elected to treat it was to say, okay, if any of those plants operated at less than a 20% capacity factor for 5 consecutive years, then it would not be economic, and it would basically be coming out. So that's actually how the base plan worked in evaluating those projects. So we ran the base plan. We also then ran I believe 9 or 10 sensitivity cases. Because we included, for example, resource options that had carbon capture, for example, on a coal plant. And it turned out that that doesn't really make sense unless you're doing carbon capture on an existing coal plant. And in our case, it picked, in effect, the Walter Scott plant because it was the newest. So we had that. We looked at nuclear. We had just all of those included in these different sensitivities. So after we did the base case and let it pick what the model would pick, we then did sensitivities that said, okay, you can't pick carbon capture and sequestration, or you can't pick carbon capture, sequestration, and nuclear, because in both cases they really haven't been proven to be something at scale at this point in time. We included hybrid. We had it let it pick hybrid solar and storage because we had separated those in the original. So we had a whole bunch of things. We retired all the coal plants in 2029. So we went through all of those and looked at how those results came out, ultimately to inform how do we think we're going to go forward to meet that 2040 goal. And so that's what I'm going to talk about just for a few minutes because it's really kind of interesting. We also, by the way, have 450 megawatts of gas. And interestingly enough, first of all, obviously in 2040, if we've got that goal, it shows we have to have all the coal units are retired. Now, the big trick to retiring those coal units is if you retire them too early, it's very expensive, and you retire them too late, it's very expensive. So part of the process we look forward over the next 20 years is making sure we make the right decisions about how we deal with the coal retirements themselves. But the other interesting thing was the base part of that plan includes retaining the entire 450 megawatts of natural gas. And that could be a head scratcher when you're thinking about, we're talking about net zero carbon for a goal. But interestingly enough, if you look at historically the last 5 years, our natural gas plants have only run at a capacity factor of about 5%. Basically, they're peakers. And so when you look at going forward, that actually is a recipe for saying, hey, that works because it's net zero is the goal. We'll find a way to basically offset the carbon from those units going forward. So what are the other pieces of that plan and what right now looks like we would do in 2040? In effect, so we're keeping the gas and or replacing it if in fact something happened and it got too old. We're keeping in effect, our Western Area Power Administration hydro project, obviously the contract with that. We're going to keep our Tier 1 wind. We have about 300 megawatts of wind in the portfolio, and it's basically a little bit exceeds the Tier 1 criteria. We're going to add Tier 1 solar, which will be about 170 megawatts. We're going to keep our landfill gas. We're going to keep the sustainable energy program. And ultimately, when you put all these pieces together, what happens is you end up with a couple hundred megawatts that's unidentified. And we believe that that's acceptable. And the board, thank goodness, agreed that given where we are, in 5 years, we're going to be doing another integrated resource plan. We do integrated resource planning all of the time when resource options come available. It's a constant process. This process, as Tom talked about, is one that we do, all of us do every 5 years as a contractual obligation under WAPA, and we do it in a very public environment. A lot of our resource planning is just day-to-day. We're checking out different resources. But at the end, we're going to have 200 megawatts. We say we don't know what it is. And that may be battery storage. It may be small modular reactors. But as those technologies evolve 5 years from now, when someone's up here talking to you about that, I'm guessing that whole plan's going to shift a little bit, and we'll know more what that looks like. But the good news from our perspective was we actually see a plan to get there. Not necessarily the timing associated with how we do it, but we've got a plan that shows how we're going to meet that need going forward, and it works. And it's just as we said before, we, both OPPD and MPD have 2050 goals. And personally, I probably would have been more comfortable trying to get to 2050. But we have a goal. We said, okay, the board said 2040. We're going to go to 2040. And we believe we've got a plan that gives us the ability to do that going forward. And I think that's a pretty important piece. And so that's why I spent a little bit of time with you all. There's a lot of detail in there, as you might guess. A lot of the stuff looks like an eye chart when you go in there and talk about the heat maps and everything about how all the resources fit together. But it is a pretty interesting process. One quick thing I'd like to add, and I'm sorry I didn't get to tell you about all the other things the LES are doing, and Tom did a great job of that, so we do a lot of that stuff too. How's that? But one of the things I do want to point out to this group, and I've not heard it mentioned at all when we talk about obstacles to either development of transmission or when we're talking about what's going on with respect to other resources, is supply chain. And supply chain issue is a huge issue for us, and particularly right now, distribution transformers. And just to give you an idea of this, what we have right now, or there are many utilities in this country who have stopped development, period. And the demand is only going up, because if we're going to have EV chargers every 50 miles, or we're going to have more renewables, it takes more transformers, and that demand right now is at a crisis situation. The industry is working with the Department of Energy and transformer manufacturers, but it doesn't look like there's any fast solutions to that. So I want everybody to keep that in mind with respect to project timing, the things you're doing, and or if you've got access to somebody that you think has influence with the federal government and helping us push hard on getting more relief on that. It appears the bulk of that problem is workforce. Some of it's competition for the steel that's used in transformers. There's lots of things. So I probably ran a little bit long. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. This is a fantastic event. I can feel the energy as I was walking in and seeing all the my OPPD colleagues and other utility colleagues. It energizes me. I'm going to cheat a little bit, and as opposed to Tom and Kevin, I do have a few slides. We debated whether we should have slides or not. There are a few points that I'm going to make that I think a visual helps. So I hope this works. There you go. So really not that different than what Tom and Kevin mentioned. We continue to keep an eye on the future. We completed an integrated resource plan earlier this year. We also completed a Pathways to Decarbonization strategic initiative, which was a precursor to our integrated resource plan. That Pathways to Decarbonization strategic initiative, which included a very robust study, was born out of a resolution. Our board of directors, some of them are here in the room, approved in 2019 a resolution that said we will be net zero carbon by 2050. And a minute after we all celebrated that, we turned to each other and said, well, how are we going to do it? Oh, we don't know. So we went on to studying the different pathways that we could take, things that we have control over, things that we don't have control over, and figure out is it possible? And if so, what are the different pathways and what are some of the no regrets investments that we will have to make in order for us to achieve this net zero carbon future? So we're doing all of these future-looking planning, resource planning, transmission planning, distribution planning going forward. And at the same time, it's making sure that we continue not only to power the future, but we need to power today. And that is not lost on any of my employees, any of our community, our customer owners. We need to make sure that we power today, that we keep reliability and resilience strong. I became CEO in the summer of last year, and 9 days after I became CEO, we were hit by the worst storm on record for OPPD. 2/3 of our customers lost power. 2/3 of our customers, and some of them were without power for 7 days. 6 months earlier, we had the polar vortex event where we had planned outages, which we all probably remember, some of us more painfully than others. So those were really important events that highlighted the importance of keeping powering today as we're powering the future. Let me talk a little bit about this, and this is really the slide that I wanted to show that led me to have slides today. A few weeks ago, I was at the Nebraska Power Association conference, and I mentioned we are growing at a pace that we've never grown before. OPPD is celebrating 76 years of history, and I can tell you that we have never added as many megawatts as we're adding today in our 76 years of history. It's about 100 megawatts a year. And you can see that in the graph that you have in front of you, on the graph on the left. That diamond represents approximately where our peak load for the summer is, about 2,500 megawatts. We have enough resources to meet our demands today. Thank goodness we're powering today. But if we do nothing with the growth that we're seeing in our service territory, both, not just industrial, commercial, and residential growth, we're going to be in trouble. So what you see here, that line, and it's just for illustrative purposes only, it shows that solid line, it's the load that we're projecting in 2027, 5 short years from now, and how that load is going to show up in our service territory by month. On top of that, I believe some of my colleagues talk about SPP, the planned reserve margin, that increased from 12% to 15%, that is represented in that dotted line. So we need to make sure that we at all times have enough resources, accredited resources, to fill up to that dotted line, that there's no white space in between. So what are we doing today? You can see the graph in the middle shows the gas assets, the Turtle Creek Station and Standing Bear Lake Station that our board approved and the Power Review Board approved, and we are well on our way to building, and I have a few pictures to show you here on those 2 power plants. They're natural gas powered plants. One of them has 9 Wärtsilä engines, reciprocating engines, totaling about 150 megawatts on that site. That one is located in Omaha, 120th and Military Road. And the other one is in Sarpy County by the landfill. That's our Turtle Creek Station. It will include 2 simple cycle gas turbines totaling about 450 megawatts each. That's that red bar, which helps a ton, especially during the winter peak. You don't see it here because it's a monthly representation, but there are days when those gas units will help fill that gap significantly. But it's not enough. And as you can see, the problem that we're trying to solve is very clearly concentrated in the summer months. And that is where solar comes in. Very plain and simple. When I talk to many communities and farmers, landowners, and they're asking me, why solar? Is it just a capricious desire of someone? It's like, no. This is why we are looking at solar, because we have a summer peak capacity issue that we're trying to solve. And the solar profile fits really well with the problem that we're trying to solve. That is up to 600 megawatts of utility scale solar to help bridge that capacity deficit that we would otherwise have in 2027 if we don't act. Getting there has been a little harder than we thought, and that's the understatement of the year. Because there are a lot of concerns. It takes a lot of land, and some communities are not equipped or used to dealing with these type of investments. So they are asking for time to study, to figure out where can we put solar, distance from roads, easements, etc. It has been a great opportunity for education for both the utilities and the local communities. Now, is this going to break the bank? Well, I hope not. OPPD is very proud. We completed 5 years of no general rate increases. Affordability is a second out of 3 missions that we have: reliable, affordable, and environmentally sensitive. We've been on a journey, and I'm looking at one of my board members who has been instrumental in helping us look at this differently. We used to focus on rates. And while rates are really important for us as utility employees, customers don't really pay rates, they pay bills. And so we started looking at the bill itself. And then there was another evolution to say, well, yeah, but the bill depends on, how you pay the bill depends on how much money you have. How can you afford that bill? So what I'm showing here to you is probably the latest evolution that we have on how we're looking at affordability, which is measuring the electricity burden of the customer owners we serve. And very clearly, we're showing here that in our service territory, on average, is 1.8%. The electricity bill represents 1.8% of our customer owners' average disposable income. Well, that's not too bad if you're in that 1.8%. But there are some customer owners whose number is 8, 9, 10, 15%. And so this type of analysis has allowed us to look at specific zip codes and figure out where are we having issues with affordability of our rates. Again, as we strive to preserve reliability and resilience, as we strive to clean the emissions of our fleet and achieve net zero carbon, we need to make sure that we keep an eye on the affordability of our bills. And it can be done. All three can be done, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of collaboration and patience. I'm going to skip on these really quick, talk about reliability, resilience, remain our main focus. If you were in Nebraska about a month and a half ago, you probably would have been really hard to miss on the news that our board approved the resolution to continue operations in our North Omaha station. Caught a lot of news, and it's really interesting because we're talking about net zero carbon by 2050, yet we had to approve a resolution to continue to consume coal for 3 more years in North Omaha. Doesn't make a lot of sense. However, it does once you take into account reliability and resilience. So in short, the reason why our board unanimous vote to approve this resolution was because it was very clear that in our journey to achieve net zero carbon and getting all the new solar, new gas interconnected, it was going to take a little bit more time than we expected to get the interconnection studies and get the final irrevocable interconnection approval from the Southwest Power Pool. A couple of just bragging photos here of the 2 new gas stations. You can see on the left the Turtle Creek Station in Sarpy County, Standing Bear Lake Station. Construction is well underway. We actually have 9 Wärtsilä engines already delivered on site. In our Standing Bear Lake Station, you can see one of them at the bottom of the screen being moved through Omaha. With the coordination with the Department of Transportation and Omaha Police, it was a fantastic project to watch them move such massive engines through urban streets. Next step of solar, again, we're still pursuing up to 600 megawatts of solar. Make no mistake, you may not have seen or heard much about new solar projects announced, but we are working around the clock. Some of you may be very involved and know about some of these projects. We have already contracted and announced an 81 megawatt project, Platteview Solar. Construction is going to start happening early next year. This photo is actually of that site when they were testing some pylons and just testing some equipment. Construction is expected to begin early 2023 with completion in early 2024. We expect to be able to announce more projects coming online here very soon. The IRA, as Tom mentioned, if it had been me, I would have named it the HUGE Act, because it is huge. We are taking advantage of that. We have a lot of analysis happening with our financial advisors and bankers in Wall Street. So that is part of the discussion of how we proceed with the additional 600 megawatts. Really quick, our commitment to environmental stewardship is not just our fleet. Pathways to Decarbonization identified these 4 areas where it's not just the energy portfolio that we're looking at. Clearly, that's where the majority of our emissions come from. But we're looking at internal operations. How do we interact with customer owners so that they too can lower their carbon emissions and their greenhouse gas footprint, and our community engagement. So it is a multifaceted approach to really be the stewards and the catalyst of change. Last but not least, I'm giving you a teaser here because we haven't released these publicly. We're starting to release these. We have employees, we have our board, but starting next year, we will have a campaign to share our vision to 2050. When our board asked us to be net zero carbon by 2050, we said, okay, and what else? What else do we want to be by 2050? So we developed this vision of powering the future by 2050. Clearly came out, 3 pillars of that is aim for perfect power. That speaks to resiliency and reliability of our system. Aim for customer freedom, allowing customers to interact with us in the different ways they want to interact with us. And then, of course, a cleaner world where every choice we make leads to a cleaner world. And with that, I'll stop talking and maybe we can have a fun conversation with my colleagues here and answer any questions. Thank you.
Time to fire away. What questions do you all have?
I'm just curious if you would speak on what you think the direct pay option, how that might alter the development of renewables in the state.
That single provision in the Act has made us rethink fundamentally the ownership framework and paradigm for our renewables. In the past, and again, our mission is to provide affordable, reliable, and environmentally sensitive power, or energy services. On the affordability piece, traditionally we have gone down the purchase power agreement route because of that direct pay or that tax subsidy has been exclusive to entities who pay taxes. The direct pay provision levels the playing field. Some would say more than levels the playing field. It really makes us look at ownership structures that are not necessarily exclusively just purchase power agreements, but now we're looking very seriously at owning and operating those facilities. It comes with a lot of issues, right? Because in the case of OPPD, we don't currently have employees who operate those facilities, who maintain those facilities. So training, bringing workforce is an issue. There are many other operational issues, but from a financial perspective now, our analysis is going to be much different than it was before.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the things that we're going to see is probably a lot of other different kinds of business models that haven't been considered before. Clearly, for us to access the tax credits, we had to be, partnering with someone or basically purchasing under PPAs. Now there's options, I think, for partnering. There's options for us to evaluate, okay, we're looking at building ourselves. How does that compare to what the options are for a PPA? And then is there hybrids to that? I think I'm guessing the development community is going to be changing as well, where they may actually turn into developers that will do turnkey projects and hand them over, and we would buy them outright. So I think there's lots of opportunity out there and probably a lot of creativity of things that we have not even conceived of yet. So.
Ditto. So I completely agree. This really is an opportunity that changes the playing field and gives us the opportunity to look at potential relationships that provide a lot more value to the people we serve. And certainly the chance to do that is really important. That's what we're about in public power. The potential to actually own facilities and bring more value as a result of that is something that we're looking at very hard. But as Kevin pointed out, I think there's other potential things that may come out of this that are still in the concept stage that are possible now because the playing field is more wide open and easier for us to compete on an even basis with others. So I think it's an all good thing for public power, and it's all good thing for Nebraska as a result.
Thank you very much. I agree. The direct payment provision of the Inflation Reduction Act is something that this industry has been working on really my whole career. I've spent so much time working on that. Many others have. So to call it HUGE, Javier, is exactly right. And I think it's going to dramatically change the environment both here in Nebraska and elsewhere in a very positive way. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Explain a little bit more what you meant about customer freedom.
Great question. I think that's a provocative topic. I think it's within the construct of public power. We're looking at not having limiting factors on the way we interact with customers. For example, I'll give you a good example of what that pillar led us to begin work today, which is OPPD. We do not have advanced meter infrastructure. We don't have AMI. We have AMR. In order for us to better interact with customers and meet them wherever they are and offer time of day rates and offer different packages and solutions, we need a much more robust two-way communication system, so that then the customer has a freedom to interact with us in many different ways, offer a lot more rates. Today, and we've had many conversations with our board members. We had a rate design project, public project. We're still going through that. The feedback we got was, hey, we want options. We want to work with you. We're not all the same type of customer. So a good example of that investment is what do we have to do in order for us to talk to customers on an ongoing basis, 24/7, two-way communications that will enable products and services that we may have not even started imagining today. But we know that without this technology, we wouldn't be able to interact and develop those rates the same way.
I think we have just a couple of minutes left, according to John here. So maybe one more question, two more questions. Yes, gentleman in the back.
Yeah, recently we've had a lot of large loads coming into the area. You talk about resource planning, you got your Amazons and your data centers. How do you analyze the cost benefit of that? Because they all come in and take up capacity, and then at the same time acquire the renewables, which kind of compounds some of the issues.
Yeah, great question. And I think that first and foremost, I think that the most important thing for us to remember is, again, as the only state that has 100% public power, one of the things that we don't have that's unique to just Nebraska is the obligation to serve. When customers come, our obligation is to serve and to try to figure out how do we best serve customers in a way that is reliable and economical, and also takes into account the rest of the service territory. In our case, very clearly, and these are projects that are official and they've been announced, and you can see them as you drive on Highway 50, it's Google and Facebook and many other data centers that are bringing significant loads. So working with those customers, very large industrial customers, and figuring out timing is incredibly important. How fast, when do they bring those loads? How fast can we meet that demand? Infrastructure that they have to install on their own. What infrastructure is on our side? Having very clear agreements about that. I can tell you, generally speaking, when we first started to see the increase in industrial load from data centers, for example, the utilization factor, the high load factor that we had from those customers was very welcome. And it is very welcome today. They can use our system in a much more efficient way than some other customers with lower load factors. So economically, it makes sense to bring those loads with high load factor. And from an economics perspective, it's a more efficient way of using our infrastructure. Our biggest problem today is how fast they're coming, and for us to say, let's slow things down. We have a lot of projects to complete before we can safely and reliably interconnect all of you.
One thing to add quickly, and we've had discussions among the three of us about OPPD is actually on the leading edge of something that both LES and NPPD are experiencing and talking to large loads too. But I think all of us, and I know LES, the first thing we do when we're talking to those large loads is we won't compromise our reliability or basically our customers from a reliability perspective or a cost perspective. So we're trying to make sure we protect our customers in our dealing with those large customers from basically having adverse impacts to the rest of our customers. So I think we all have that fundamental common position, and it's the right thing to do, but it is, as Javier said, it's challenging both based on speed and size of many of these customers for us. So,
Tom, last word.
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's one that, in fact, we had a nice long discussion with our customers last week about this topic, and it's certainly a big part of our integrated resource plan. It's amazing, and Javier and OPPD are on the leading edge because they've got these commitments, but it's amazing as I've looked at 2021, the interest in Nebraska for development of major big-time things related to industries that are close to us, agriculture, clean energy, hydrogen, data centers, all that kind of stuff. And so what an opportunity and what a challenge. And this is where public power really shines. And it's the same issues as Kevin pointed out in terms of you got to make sure you ensure reliability, you got to make sure you manage risk, and you got to figure out how to serve load because we have an obligation to serve. We should be welcoming and serving loads in this state that help the state grow and develop. We should. And what's interesting is we've done this before. We did this in the 70s when there was a big build out in center pivot irrigation that increased a lot of load. We did this in the 90s when the ethanol industry came along. So we can do this as an industry. The challenges are different today. Certainly these big loads that are coming in are interested in a different resource mix than we were offering in the 70s. There's a lot of interest in clean energy resources and renewables and nuclear and how that all fits together. And that's the challenge we have, bringing that all to the table. But the way we do that in public power is we band together to manage the risk appropriately and share the risk in a way that's good for all the customers. And to me, that is what makes our business model special.
Well, thank you very much. I wish we could have more time for questions, but I do need to get you on your way for the rest of the conference. So please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.